Hello, everyone. Lucy Heavens here with another episode of CMO Therapy, a podcast that's hopefully going to help you navigate your way through your marketing journey. Because let me tell you, I get it. Being a marketing leader is no walk in the park. In each episode, we dive headfirst into the world of marketing, where uncertainty, tight budgets, and fierce competition are just the beginning of the rollercoaster ride. But guess what? You are not alone in this journey. Why go solo when you can tap into the powerhouse of insights from some of the most awesome marketing leaders in the game? And look, the title might include the word therapy, but we are not just talking about challenges here, we are tackling them head on. So join us as we deep dive into the nitty gritty, share war stories, and unlock secret strategies. And get ready for no holds bars conversation because sometimes I have no filter. So if you are a chief marketing officer, a marketing lead, or someone just looking to up their marketing game, then I am so glad that you're here with us today. And today I am super, super excited to have with me the godfather of Martech, Scott Brinker. Scott, can you give a little bit of an introduction to the audience, please?
Sure. Well, it's great to be here with you. Yeah, I've been at this intersection of marketing and technology essentially my entire career. I started life as an engineer, but building things for marketers. As an entrepreneur, built originally a web development company and then ultimately a SaaS company. After that, I spent about 8 years with HubSpot building out their technology partner ecosystem. And sort of all along on that, I've been writing, speaking, and essentially trying to make sense of the world of marketing and technology colliding together. And it doesn't seem to slow down.
No, no, it doesn't. And by the sounds of it, you're a very nice godfather, then, not the godfather that we're living.
I like to say we should A/B test an offer they can't refuse.
So we chose a title for this podcast, which is Your Martech Stack is Not the Strategy. And we chose this because honestly, I think it's something that I think a lot of marketing leaders really need to kind of hear and to kind of come to terms with right now. And there's so much noise going on around all of this technology. And I mean so much noise around AI being the answer to everything. Every vendor, every conference, every LinkedIn post, it's all telling you to throw AI at your problems and then watch, the magic, the fairy dust happen. And what I'm seeing is that marketers are being pushed into this frenzy of buying and adding and just layer upon layer, where somewhere in all of that chaos, I think the actual strategy has sort of been lost a little bit. So I think, yeah, we're doing a lot of shopping. I think we're sort of trying to call it transformation, but I think there's kind of a bit of a difference. Today's conversation is about really cutting through that and asking the really hard questions. What are we actually trying to achieve here? Does any of this technology genuinely help us get there? And Scott, you are quite literally the person who tracks the Martech landscape more closely than anyone else on this planet. So if anyone can help us separate all of that signal from noise, then I'm sure it's you. So
All right. Well, I'll do my best, but I
I picked
fully
you up
agree
now.
with the thesis you presented. So, yeah, looking forward to this.
So, like I said there, and this was one of the, I actually saw your presentation recently at a conference, but you've been tracking the Martech landscape for years. And every year it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and messier and slightly more ridiculous. Are we finally at the point where CMOs need to stop asking, like, what tools do we need and start asking different questions?
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, I feel a bit bad about having produced that landscape over all these years because, don't get me wrong, it's very interesting the way in which like the technology industry around marketing has exploded, and there's a lot of fascinating dynamics to that. But in some ways, yeah, it almost from the beginning has become a distraction from really what marketing is all about. Like, I gotta understand who my customers are, what matters to them, how do I reach and engage with them. And by all means, technology can be an enabler and a mechanism that we use for that. But the order of operations there is like, okay, the marketing and the strategy comes first, and then you're, applying the right technology to, okay, how do we actually execute on that? So to your question here of like, oh, can we finally stop thinking technology first? man, if I had my druthers, we never would have been thinking technology first in the first place. It's just it's in technology they sometimes refer to it as like a hammer, and then it's looking for a thing like, oh well, I guess everything's a nail. But yes, please, let's start with the question of what are we actually trying to achieve from the business.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, so I mean, where's the difference then? What's the difference between like having that kind of like technology stack in mind and actually kind of like leading with that versus kind of the having this proper marketing sort of like an architecture or whatever that sort of supports you? Like how do you balance that?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so we do have to recognize marketing now operates in an environment that is thoroughly mediated and enabled by software. I mean, the vast majority of channels that we're engaging with are either themselves purely digital channels, or even those that aren't digital, that make their way into whether it's call centers or deployments of things out into the real world, direct mail, things like that. Even when they actually materialize in some sort of physical incarnation, very often it's a bunch of software behind the scenes that we're using to orchestrate that and deliver it. So like we accept the fact that marketing is very technology powered. One of the most valuable assets to marketing. We don't always use it well, but one of the most valuable assets, that we've developed here over the past 20, 25 years, has been this really rich set of data, to help us better understand our customers, better understand the dynamics of what they're doing. So given that, you can't just say like the technology doesn't matter. The technology does matter. And one of the whole ideas of, I like the way you frame it is, architecture is, it's not just about saying like, well, let's pick this tool for this issue and this tool for that one. And you end up with this sort of, I was going to use a not so nice word, but you end up with this tangle, of technology that isn't actually really connected to each other. This is the integration problem that, almost anyone in marketing is like, oh, what was your number one technical problem with your marketing tech? Oh, well, it doesn't seem to integrate very well together. The antidote to that is to be able to step back and think, okay, how do we actually architect a foundation for our marketing technology? Like the core ways in which we're managing our data systems, what's our core system that we're using to sort of almost like a center of gravity, orchestrate the different activities that we're doing around that. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't have to be, the Eiffel Tower of Martech, architecture. It just has to be something that's like a really clear, solid foundation around which then you're able to, as necessary, bring in more specialized tools for very specific needs.
Yeah, it's so true, especially what you just said as well about, the hammer kind of looking for looking for the nail. And I think too often that's what we get because obviously we're being marketed to as well. We're being bombarded with messages and posts and things on LinkedIn that's telling us that, we should be doing this, we should be doing this, and this is the platform that's going to give you all of this data, you didn't realize that it was missing. And I think that's kind of the problem is that we're drowning in kind of all those messages. But yeah, what we should be doing is really go back. And like one example I remember, and this is like old example now, but back in the day when we had that dark funnel, for example, and we didn't really understand what was going on before somebody filled in a form on the website. Whereas now we've got so many systems out there that are looking at kind of intent and giving us kind of a lot more of this data. So that was kind of a problem that we had that we could solve with various types of technology solutions. It wasn't that we were going out there looking for like a particular tool.
Well, one of the things too is, marketing is so challenging these days. I really have just such tremendous respect, for marketers. I don't consider myself a marketer. I consider myself adjacent, to marketers. But I put marketers on a pedestal because I'd be hard pressed to think of any other profession that both has seen like such a wide and dramatic set of changes. I mean, the space is just constantly changing. And one of the things about marketing is we keep adding new things into the marketers, universe that they're responsible for, and they have to know and they have to figure out. But it never feels like we take anything out. Like you even go back to all the fundamentals and the 4Ps and all this. I mean, that's as relevant and as essential for a marketer to be great at today as it was, 30 years ago. But now we've got all these other things that you're expected to know and master. I mean, it is a little bit, crazy there. And I think one of the ways to approach that is to realize, okay, we are human. We have limited time. We have limited bandwidth. Our teams, we know we benefit from focus. And so instead of trying to do this very broad coverage of like, okay, every possible channel and every possible tactic and every possible thing and somehow trying to do all of them, if you go back to really trying to understand, okay, who are our customers, what really matters to them, to really be able to identify like, okay, well, what are the 2 or 3 places where we really want to be great? Maybe it's a certain set of social channels, maybe it's the way in which, we engage them, through like an e-commerce, experience. You pick, you have to sort of, really come to understand your customer. But to focus on doing 2 or 3 things like really great, and actually being perfectly fine with the fact that there's a whole bunch of other possible channels and tactics that we can be engaged in, but we just can't do it all. And if you take that simplification approach from like a prioritization of your strategy and your operations, you can then use that also, as kind of like the Occam's razor for your technology stack of being like, okay, well, we want to get really good on our technology for these 2 or 3 things. Honestly, a bunch of this other technology, not really sure we need to worry about that.
Yeah, that's so true. Because there's so many times I speak to kind of marketing leaders when they've gone into a new role and, they're faced with this, like you say, kind of plate of spaghetti, with all of these kind of systems and tools, and they just don't know kind of what to do with it. So I think, yeah, that's a very common situation. It's just built up, like I said in kind of the intro, there is that layering effect that happens. You just kind of keep buying things and layering it on top. But yeah, that's your advice then in that situation where if you have got to that, where you've got sort of that big plate of spaghetti, is really just take a step back and focus on a couple of things. Is that right?
Yeah. So one of my collaborators, Franz Riemersma, we do a number of like annual research reports in this space, and he has a very clever way of framing this, where he talks about it being cash over coverage. That if you actually understand, okay, who are your best customers, what really matters to them, and what are the 2 or 3 things that really make a difference in winning and delighting them, if you understand where your cash is coming from, your margin, like how the business actually grows, then to just, focus on that and not try and do this like coverage of every possible thing that in theory, the technology is all out there. There's infinite things we could be doing, but you just can't do it all well. And yeah, just the hairball, that you end up with all this technology trying to just have coverage over cash. Cash over coverage.
I love that, Kat. Yeah, my version of that is I want to fish from a bucket and not the sea. Which is the same sort of thing. It's like, yeah, if you're looking at if you know your ICP, your audience so well, you can get it to a point where you've got it in a bucket in front of you, and that's
I
so much
love
easier.
that.
um, okay, so we need to talk about AI. I always try and avoid it, but I think we have to in this chat. I think the problem is like, well, let me ask you, like, where do you think you're genuinely kind of seeing change with AI? Like, what have you got any kind of stories rather than just kind of technology vendors that are just sort of slapping a bit of AI, on their logo?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it's hard to like paint this with a broad brush, but I will anyway. Actually, for a lot of those existing SaaS players that keep throwing AI features into their product, most of the time they just don't get used. And even for those companies that are public and are reporting, financial information on this, most of the ways their customers are actually using things and the money that they're actually spending on is the core capabilities. It's not this new AI stuff. Like, surprise, surprise, most people actually don't want to have to learn like 50 new things of how they can do it in their product. But that being said, I mean, this underlying technology that this wave of generative AI and LLMs and even their like inference, their ability to reason, I mean, from a purely technological perspective, it is a massive leap forward in underlying capability, and so it really then becomes a question of like, okay, well, how do we apply that? How do we harness it? I think in marketing, one of the ways that became very easy for us right away was like, oh, well, actually, this can help us with content and content production. This is where you get yourself into a little bit of a, position of like, okay, it can help accelerate a lot of content production. It can also create a tremendous amount of what we've now come to call AI slop, So the amount of judgment and taste that you need, like if you're controlling how you're using it with judgment and taste, it can be a great accelerant. If you're just, going hog wild with it, probably actually doing more harm than good. But actually, one of the use cases that I find to be even more helpful is using it as almost like a data analyst that's in everybody's pocket, because thanks to some things like MCP, where we're increasingly able to connect different marketing systems to like ChatGPT or Claude or something like that, and then rather than having to hunt in all of these different products for all of their different reporting mechanisms and how do I configure this and how do I do that, how does it line it up to that, which was always a pain, to then just, connect these systems, say up to Claude, and then be able to get, Claude, listen, I want to understand like which segments of my customers are like responding to this campaign, how long does it take? And it's these engines are like really good at being able to synthesize across that data set, and help provide, those answers on demand. Little caveat, they hallucinate. They are not perfect on this, so you can't just, take it at fully face value. But even, I mean, honestly, when we ask humans to do this stuff, we've been known to hallucinate a bit too, So as long as you're treating it as something that, isn't infallible, but you're using it as a way to just, without having to wait for like being in a queue with some analyst to get to something like 3 weeks, just being able to ask questions and explore and, like follow these threads. I think that's such an enormous gift for marketers who, just always want to better understand like what's working in their customers and what those opportunities are. But one of the things I love about marketers is one of their superpowers is just this infinite fountain of ideas and questions, and like normally we've had to suppress so much of that just because, all right, well, I mean, I can't track down my analyst and ask them a million questions at 2 a.m. in the morning. Well, kind of now you can, and so I think that's actually been one of the greatest unlocks, for marketers, at least those who are using this, with the appropriate skepticism, of what it comes back with.
It's really, I love how you framed that, everybody should remember that it is basically just like a kind of another person in your organization with an opinion. That's what it is. It's like, when somebody first joins the organization and suddenly, for the first few months, everybody's like hanging on their every word because it's a new opinion in the business. It's a new thoughts that they're kind of bringing in, and everybody's like, wow, we should all listen to this person, but yeah, it's a little bit like that's what it feels. Actually, it does feel like every company is what's the word, really hanging on kind of what AI says and thinking that it's always kind of 100% right. And I think that's for me like the little bit of a dangerous thing, whereas if you frame it the way you did, like it's a data analyst, it's got an opinion. It might not always be right. You need to kind of, to think that and double check it. That's a way of thinking about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very, you framed it in a much more succinct and eloquent way than I did. So, yes.
Quick pause while you sip your coffee or contemplate your next big marketing project. If you're enjoying CMO Therapy, then please go ahead and tap that follow button. It really helps more than you think. And let's be honest, we both know this isn't the worst thing that you've been influenced to click today. All right, Back to it. And the connectedness is a really big point as well, actually, because this is something that's on my mind at the moment, is bugging me a bit because, I remember, I'm a little bit older than I look, but I remember back in the day when the Martech sort of boom did start happening, like back kind of, around sort of like the end of the kind of 90s, beginning like 2000. And all of these new systems started to come in, the really big, like meaty sort of CRM systems and the joining up of like the marketing automation systems as well. Um, but the problem that we had was before that was that everything was disconnected, right? We had all of these different silos of systems, and then everything started to like really come together, and we had everything kind of connected. And I see that kind of almost a little bit again now, like everything's suddenly like blown up. Everyone's like creating their own agents, but they're all sitting in silos across the business. Like I notice, kind of even in just in marketing, you'll have like kind of content that has their little kind of, set of agents that they've got working, and then product marketing over there have got something a little bit different. And yeah, I think we really need to see a little bit more of that like joined up.
Yeah, I mean, the way I've been thinking about it, because, all right, my first work when I was a software engineer was actually writing games, and in particular writing multiplayer games in the early days of connectivity, as the web was just getting started. And so sort of like the metaphor for me is like a lot of the ways we're using AI today is this single player mode. Like if it's just you and you're working, with your AI assistant, you're doing stuff, it's awesome. It really does enable a tremendous amount of capabilities. But most businesses are not single player businesses. It's multiple people, and like the way in which, for a business to have a coherence and a consistency to it, like it is a multiplayer game. And I'd say that's one of the things that just right now is kind of missing in this generation of what we're currently doing with AI. It's like, yeah, you get all these people empowered with all these great single player, motions, but the mechanisms for how do we organize and manage this in a multiplayer mode, it's just very early, Now, the technical way people now talk about this, the highfalutin way for it, is to say like orchestration. Like, okay, what we need orchestration. And so I think we at least all recognize the challenge. I think you've got a lot of vendors, a lot of very different vendors coming from different angles, who are all like, okay, we're going to solve this problem of orchestration. But I think here today, at this exact moment, it's certainly not solved. And I think we will solve it, but I think it's going to take a while. I think it's a fairly complex problem.
No, I think you're right. You're totally right. And on that then, and considering the podcast is CMO Therapy, I have a little bit of a therapy thing that I'd like help with. And that is that. So I mean, I've always worked in technology. That's my like, so working with technology firms, helping to kind of sell technology solutions into financial institutions. And one of the things that I've always, across my sort of 20 odd year career, I've always come across is the whole build versus buy, right?
Mm.
So, we're constantly battling that build versus buy mentality, where we're saying, why would you, as a big global bank, kind of build all of these platforms when you can go out there and there are vendors that have been doing it for 20, 30, 40 years, that have all of that really strong data plus that orchestration layer. Like, we've done it for you, so why should you? Yeah. Then from a CMO perspective, as soon as we kind of, like look at things that are our strategy and what we want to do, the first question that we get back is, well, don't buy any more technology solutions, just build agents yourself. And it kind of bugs me a bit. But yeah, if you were talking to kind of CMOs that are kind of under that pressure, where they're being sort of told, no, you need to build all these or do more with AI yourself, versus kind of buying things, like what advice would you give?
Oh, I think the worst thing marketers could do is build things that they have the option to just buy. For a whole variety of reasons. Part of it just comes down to comparative advantage. I mean, are you hiring a marketing team to become software developers? Why? Generally, you're hiring the marketing team to like focus on marketing, which, as turns out, we were talking, right, is fairly large domain of things that need to be done. And so, but even beyond that, like some of the stuff that you talk about wanting to build, like if it's I think of it as almost like an infrastructure layer. I mean, like things like a CRM or a marketing automation platform, like, not only do I think you don't want to spend a lot of time building that, turns out those things actually are fairly complex. When you really start to get into it and what are the different use cases, and once I start building it, now I have to maintain it, so I would say where you can, buying is almost always like the best option. Now, the caveat to this is I actually do think there's a tremendous number of things that marketers can and should build, but I think it's at the next layer up. It's not about like trying to reinvent all these commercial software platforms, but it's like, hey, we have this very specific experience we want to create, for customers that honestly we can't buy it. Like, or like we want to do our own particular workflow of how we're going to run things. And we're certainly going to leverage those existing systems, our CRM, our marketing automation, our content management, whatever. But what we want to do is sort of build something on top of that finds a way to orchestrate it or, combine it, in some sort of process or operation that is really optimized for our business. I think building those sorts of things can be incredibly valuable. And honestly, marketers really didn't even have that option up until now. I mean, like, we largely took the software vendors gave us and we adapted to the software rather than the software adapting to us. And so I think this degree to which you could have a lighter layer of AI created apps or agents or automations or whatnot, hyper tailored to exactly what you want, but they're resting on that infrastructure foundation that you don't want to have to build from the ground up. I think that's kind of the best of both worlds.
I love that. And you can only get to that. You can only have that vision or that map of that architecture if you start going right back to where we started at the beginning. If you start with the kind of what problems am I trying to solve? Because if you come at it from the other way, you're not going to get that. You're just going to end up with a really heavy like kind of bottom layer, I suppose, where you're just buying in a bunch of stuff when there is, I do appreciate there is stuff that you can build yourself.
Yeah, I mean, at that point in time, like, yeah, stop doing whatever business you're doing and like say like, okay, I'm going to go into the business of building CRMs. I mean, I'm not sure I would recommend that as it's a
I
bit of
have
a crowded
seen
market,
people
but
try and
if
do
that's
that.
really what you want to go do, then go build a CRM and go into that world. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, exactly. It's, exactly where we started. Like, okay, who are we actually trying to win, business with? What matters to them? What's the sort of experience we have to deliver them? You have that front and center, then sort of it really does help clear the fog of a lot of this just overwhelming technical possibility that without the direction, yeah, it's just very easy to get like lost in the tall grass.
Yeah, yeah. If you was kind of had a marketing leader kind of sitting in front of you now, and you had to tell them, there was kind of one thing, one recommendation that they should kind of fix, I suppose. What would you tell them to focus on?
You know, this is going to sound trite because I feel like we've been saying this for a long time, but it's as true today as it ever was, which is, really focus on your data. Partly because, I mean, for all the reasons we wanted our data to be really good and accessible for years, but now we have one more reason, which is all this fun stuff we'd really like to be able to do with AI, whether it's even just behind the scenes and data analysis, that sort of analyst in a box, if you will, or leveraging it to being able to do more creative engagements with AI for personalization. We're starting to see, these agent channels, emerging. There's going to be a lot of stuff we really want to leverage AI for, but it's all predicated on having good, solid data. And so I kind of feel like you don't have to buy into the hype of any specific thing. Like we just all know, like the investments you make in making your data richer, cleaner, more accessible across the different components of your business, that's going to pay off on so many different dimensions. It just feels like a very solid place to, put your thumb.
I love that. And that's actually somewhere where I would invest AI. is actually build. I know it sounds silly, but like, so for example, I mean, I remember again back in the day building out my kind of ICP, like my target addressable market, literally manually by doing kind of research across websites and then building it all into a spreadsheet. Like I remember doing that. It took me about 10 months to build this addressable markets list. Whereas now with tools like Clay and well, all of those sorts of tools, you can do it literally within, you know, within hours or whatever.
Yeah. I mean,
It's crazy.
it's a wonderful thing, you know. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
always good when you actually find like legitimate ways to apply this stuff that's in the service, you know, of your strategy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I do. I have a little bit of a cheer in my chair sometimes. I just used AI for this. I am using it. One last question for you. Just we're coming up to time, but what are, and you use the word kind of hype there. Like, what are you hyped about what at the moment? What's kind of coming? Like, what do you see sort of coming down the pipe, or you know, what's exciting you at the moment?
You know, I really do think that data layer is maturing in some very exciting ways. You know, now for smaller businesses, this maybe isn't as relevant yet, but you start getting into mid-market and certainly enterprise businesses, this move towards cloud data warehouses, lake houses, things like that, a huge opportunity for marketers because we're finally getting this data flowing. Like pretty much everything across the company is steadily starting to push its data down into that layer. And now we've also got the mechanisms that once data is in that layer, we can also pull it out, you know, to bring it into particular applications we want to use. And AI, oh my goodness, right? I mean, you know, this is like a feast, you know, for AI to be able to have, you know, that data flowing. There's a lot of work to be done there. I mean, still a lot of work in like, you know, getting things connected. There's, it's a little bit technical, but this idea of a semantic layer of like, hey, first challenge was getting all the data connected. The second challenge, as soon as we get all the data connected, is like, wow, you know, the way, you know, product talks about this is very different than marketing. That's very different than sales, you know, and so some work needs to be done around creating a common semantic set of definitions of like, okay, what's what, you know, non-trivial work, but boy, you get that in place and now you start to really have this ability to leverage data, you know, across departments, across applications. I think that's the most exciting thing that's happening in Martech. And even though AI gets all the headlines, I think it's the data
And
layer where the magic's happening.
And that's the point where you can really accelerate and start bringing in kind of, you know, agentic sort of type AI technologies and things, right? Because, you know, once the data is right and you're confident, and I think that's the thing, like it's everybody at the moment is doesn't have the confidence, not in the AI technology, but you're right, it's the data kind of sitting underneath it. That's why we keep wanting to kind of check the output before it's, you know, before it starts to sort of automate. But yeah, that's so good. I really like that. Thank you, bringing it back to the data. But thank you very very much. We've come up to time now, but that was really really super interesting, and I'm sure my audience is gonna absolutely love that. Take lots away from it. So thank you very much.
Oh, thanks for having me, Lucy.
Enjoy the rest of your day.